But there's always this competition just to make sure that I'm stronger than you, because then my race or my family survives. So this push for more, I think, is something that is deep down in our human DNA, right, in our brain. And there to find the equilibrium and to grow in a capitalist society, integrating the planet, not having that one-way street of extraction, but value creation together, the human with the earth and earth with the human. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to.
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. Yeah. But I'm so fascinated about your perspective from working, being investor for corporations, and curious about the industrial growth society and the extractive mentality, because we as a species do have this extractive mentality where we think our natural resources are going to last forever. And so we just keep going, full on extracting as if we can.
As if we had 5 planets. Somebody, I don't know who it was.
Yeah.
I love that. People don't realize we don't have 5 planets we can live on. This is the one.
This is our only home.
Together, we go out there. Together, we begin to share. Together, we find our way. Together.
Welcome back to another episode here on Mentory TV. I'm Patricia Falco Beccalli, your host, and thank you so much for joining us, for staying curious and being curious and just joining us yet again for a conversation. And thank you for joining us as subscribers. We had such a big barrage of new subscribers, so thank you for joining and staying. And if you like this episode, give us a like and subscribe if you're the first time with us here on Mentory TV. Well, today we're going to look at I would say the pandemic when it comes to what is going on in humanity, and that is our climate crisis or climate catastrophe. And I'm going to look at this specific book. I read it, and I can only tell you, if you want to know anything about where we are in terms of climate crisis and where we could go, have a look at Susan Bauer-Wu's book, due to be released on the 13th of June, A Future We Can Love. And this book has been inspired by a conversation by the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg not too long ago. And Susan, she joins us today on the show to talk about the book and the approach to us, all of us, to climate change. Susan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm really delighted to be here with you.
I can tell you one thing, Susan. I was flabbergasted. I thought, I'm green. I'm outed. I'm green. I'm like my walls in the back. I'm a total tree hugger, bunny hugger. I switch off the lights. I turn off the water. I try only to use cold showers unless I wash my hair. I separate garbage since I'm 5, because in Germany, that was just the thing to do already back in the 70s. I demonstrated against cutting down trees for some sort of airports in Frankfurt to be expanded. But boy, did I know little about the actual science about climate feedback loops, human feedback loops. So I had a real educational session with your book. So thank you so much for writing it. Let me quickly start off with a quote I picked up, which really struck me, Susan. And that was, you said, I'm writing this book as Susan, the person, the mother, the grandmother, and not the president of Mind and Life Institute. How come that you felt you needed to write it as not a profession, but as a person? Well,
yes, I run an organization that's a pretty large international organization. But I, as a person, and our organization cares about climate and the human-earth connection and do everything we can to raise awareness. But I myself, I'm not a climate expert. And I didn't think I was a climate activist, but I'm starting to get excited to feel like I need to do everything that I can. But what really, it came down to this. Like, I am a mother of adult children. I'm a grandmother. My 2 grandchildren are now 1 and 5. And I have nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews. And the future isn't looking good, but we haven't crossed the tipping point yet. And we have to do everything we can. And I'll share with you, one little story that's actually in A Future We Can Love. And it's something that I feel like I come back to. It's like, okay, do I keep going? Do I keep going? Or do I just say, you know what, the science is out, there's nothing we can do? I believe there are things we can do. It's not too late. But the story is a story about the turtles that are traveling long distances. They go back to Costa Rica, to the beaches where they were born, decades after they were born. And the mothers, these mother turtles, lay their eggs, and she covers them up with her fins, and then she swims away, and she leaves them and lets them basically, hopefully, live and be strong beings. And to me, that speaks to why I am doing what I could do, is that I'm, laying eggs, I'm covering up the eggs and doing everything I can to try to have it be a future that our children and grandchildren can love. Because what's the alternative?
Yeah.
And so we don't know, but we have to do everything we can.
Yes. And I think when it comes to the actual tools, we get into that. And what really struck me about that story is, I'm also a mother turtle. I laid my egg. But I think the big difference is here that the turtle trusts in nature.
Yes.
Decades and after decades and after decades, nature is going to take over and kind of take over until the egg is hatched. And nature has not changed. But all of a sudden, as we humans expand, as our industries grow and grow and grow and take and take and take from nature, climate changes. So is the mother turtle in future right in trusting her eggs into nature, because nature might not be giving the egg what it needs to hatch? And I think this is exactly where, you and I and the mama turtle have a little bit of an issue going forward, right?
Yeah. But we can't stop. We have to do the right thing now.
Yes. And
it takes all of us to do that.
Well, Susan, before we get into the in-depth of your book, A Future We Can Love, during my research, I stumbled over a documentary called Smoke and Fumes, the biggest cover-up in history, 60 years of climate change secrets by Johann von Mirbach. And it actually shows and seems to prove that research and knowledge was already gathered back in the 1940s and 50s. A couple of reports, the Brennan Report in 1957 and the Robinson Report in 1968, came out and really showed a link between carbon emission and the impact on our planet's atmosphere. Let's have a look together, and I would really appreciate your take on that one.
We're in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. We're trying to get hold of the oil industry's classified files. We're on our way to meet the man who found and published them. He says managers of the oil company ExxonMobil knew about climate change for 60 years. But is this really possible? And why would they hide this knowledge?
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Carol Muffett is working for an NGO fighting for more environmental protection. He shows us old studies on climate change. The Brennan Report examined the effects of exhaust fumes on our atmosphere back in 1957. It was commissioned by ExxonMobil. He also brought along the Robinson Report from 1968. It was written by the Stanford Research Institute and funded by the oil industry.
We have it there in black and white. Here are a few things that they said about carbon dioxide. If CO2 levels continue to rise at present rates, it is likely that noticeable increases in temperature could occur. However, there seems to be no doubt that the potential damage to our environment could be severe. Although there are other possible sources for the additional CO2 now being observed in the atmosphere, none seems to fit the presently observed situation, as well as the fossil fuel emanation theory. This device was delivered to the oil industry at its very top levels, and we can prove that. We can prove that high-level executives in all of the companies saw this report.
The Robinson Report proves that 50 years ago, the oil industry knew that burning fossil fuels had an effect on global climate.
It's heartbreaking. It's like to know that we have known, we, the collective humans and the leaders of these oil companies, have known for multiple decades. And it's still here we are. We're still buying big cars, and there are private jets flying, and the disillusioned and the lies that we've had to endure. And why? Why is it? We can have a whole conversation around that. Why? So first, seeing that, it breaks my heart. It makes me deeply sad. It makes me angry. We wouldn't be in a crisis right now if we had listened a lot earlier, a lot sooner.
I think this word, if we had listened, my question was, when I was looking at, the trajectory of having research almost proving, also by, the Stanford Research Institute, that there is a direct correlation between CO2 emissions, human-generated, industry-generated CO2 emission, and changes in our atmosphere, that it wasn't really communicated. So, the secret was not only kept for a long time, but even when it came out, because people started noticing things, it was either played down or just not communicated right. And I think somewhere in your book, you actually said the biggest downfall of the climate activists in general is that they communicated right. Was it just because they focused too much on science and not enough, on my personal interest, your personal interest, my garden drying out and all the investments that I did into my flowers, another year is gone because they were burned by the heat or burned by the fire?
Yeah, I think that, I think it's really hard because basically we're at a point in this moment in history that we are all asked to look inward. And that means changing our mindsets, changing what we're comfortable with, making choices and making decisions of how we're living our lives now, again, to trust that these actions matter for the future. And we don't all want to give up our comforts. But I think a really important thing, this is one thing I've learned through writing. There's a lot of things I learned through writing the book and the research of it. And that's what, I'm happy to share with you all today. And I've learned, and I think the COVID-19 pandemic helped us with this as well, is that changing the way we're living doesn't have to be that we have less, that it's a scarcity mentality. We actually could have so much more. We can be much more present to our communities, to the land that we live in, to having less may actually help us to realize that we are enough and that we have enough, and that stuff isn't going to make us happy. We know that. The science even knows that stuff doesn't make us happy. We do need a certain level to be comfortable, but once we all reach that basic level, it's enough. Beyond that, it actually creates more suffering.
Yeah, and I think that approach is so different to climate change because, everybody I talk to, everybody says, yeah, I'm trying to do something, but nobody is really convinced that their contribution makes the shift. You see, I feel always when I talk about how to save the climate that everybody goes like, they feel overwhelmed. They don't feel empowered. They don't really know if what little contribution they give does really shift the needle, because we are, as system thinkers, or those system thinkers you talk about in your book as well, we know that there is interdependence, and then there is like an impact or action reaction. If I do something here in Zurich, eventually it will be on the other side of the Atlantic with you. The impact, people might not believe it, but it is just so. We don't live individually in a vacuum. We are interconnected, and today more so. So I wonder to what extent what you are saying, that the human being needs to overcome maybe feeling powerless, maybe really standing up and giving up this lack thinking that, I feel a lack, so I have to fill with goods, consumption, and more, and growth. But it's growth development.
Yeah, I actually think that we have to come to this point of just sort of slowing down, checking in, and noticing what are we afraid of? Like for me, I could be honest and say that I was really afraid, like I have been afraid, and the way, like I would shy away from reading and watching things. Because it was just too much and too scary. But the more that we start talking about it, A Future We Can Love was inspired by a conversation. It was a conversation with the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg and climate scientists. The book is written like a conversation, which you've probably seen. I wrote it in a way that I'm just talking and interviewing people. And my hope is that it sparks a conversation. And I think that the more that we're all talking about it, then the less frozen we feel, the less afraid we feel, and the more empowered we feel, and the more we realize we're not alone. And that was really inspiring for me. It's like, there are so many people who care, who are doing amazing, amazing things to address this. And when we start to see that, we realize, wow, I want to be part of it.
Yeah, and I think this wanting to be part of it is a dual sword, I feel, because the image of climate activists, all right, or environmentalists or protectionists, NGOs in general, they're almost seen as like environmental terrorists, where they need by now to take drastic action to be heard. And this drastic action is something like the last generation, for example, gluing themselves on the street or going to the Louvre and destroying wonderful, beautiful art to be heard. Not to destroy the art, but because, like terrorists, unless they're heard or unless they do that, they might not even be taken seriously. And I think this is another obstacle, apart from this feeling of powerlessness. Even if you step into action, you might be, because of lack of knowledge, because of lack of conviction, because of lack of whatever other people may have, pigeonholed into something that disempowers you, even though you're starting to be active.
Yeah, I think your point here is really well taken. And it's like we don't have to be extreme disruptors to be doing something. We really don't. And I just, to give you a couple of examples that are really simple examples, really simple, but significant ones. So one is and maybe this is more of a United States kind of thing, but buying locally, buying local, fresh, small local farms, smaller local farms, and goods that are made locally that don't have to be shipped from across the globe that are using fossil fuels, right? That's like a simple, that's on my to-do list that I'm doing more of. And something I'm doing less of that I didn't think was possible 3 or 5 years ago. Again, COVID helped this. I am absolutely traveling less. And to realize that actually some of the most fulfilling vacations can be very close to home. You could re-look at where you are and how you can have a wonderful time. Look with fresh eyes in a relatively small geographic region instead of flying across the globe to go someplace exotic, right? So we have to begin to change our mindsets of what we think makes us happy. And then the conversations, you know what? My conversations with people, it's not like you need to do this. It's much more, again, you asked a question earlier about communication and what went wrong. And I think that the issue, and I think actually the communication scientists even say this, is that we need to touch into helping people realize what is important to them. What is important to you? What is important to you, Patricia, right? And once you begin to connect on that level and we recognize what's most meaningful, we can always connect the dots related to the climate crisis. And the other thing is maybe we shouldn't use the word climate or climate crisis because that actually turns people off. And we may use different language depending on who we're talking to. We get skillful in doing that. But I think it relates to the times that we're in, I don't have an exact answer. Maybe you don't want to.
No, I was thinking about it. And for me, it's not the climate crisis. It's not the planet crisis. It is, for me, the crisis of humanity.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. What does that spark in your mind? Why would you agree?
It is the crisis of humanity. We are at a point in our human history, looking back hundreds of thousands, millions of years, we are at a point that we've never been at before. It's been coming over the last few hundred years with the industrial, revolution, but we've never been at this place before. And how we show up now is going to have dramatic effects.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And we are seeing them already. We're seeing them with the floods, with the fires in California, with the fires in the Nordics. I mean, I sit in Europe.
I know.
Never did we hear about wildfires in Sweden because it was so hot that it lit up, or in Canada for that matter. So these are climates where, the summer goes up 25, 26 degrees Celsius maximum, but not to a point where all of a sudden the wood is burning, turning a carbon sink to a carbon source big time. And it is incredible. Yeah. And there are so many things you touched on. I would like to go a little bit deeper because you talked about the motivation. What motivates you, Patricia? What motivates you, Susan, in order to take action? And this is what I liked about the structure, how your book was actually set up. Yes, you were inspired by the conversation between the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg. It is so easily written. You really, if it wasn't for all the science, it would take about an evening to read through it because it's so wonderfully written, but you really have to kind of reread the unbelievable stories and stats you bring out there. Is that you look basically at the structure of knowledge, capacities, willingness, and action. So these are your four sections, and within that, or the overall umbrella is actually the human being and our approach, our mindset. You mentioned it earlier on. Various times on how to position us with it. We are positioned on the earth, and the interdependence is not, as far as I'm concerned, the interdependence, because we depend on the planet. The planet does not depend on us. Okay, so whilst I think there's an interdependence amongst humans and what we do, and there's a correspondence between what I do affects you and vice versa, I think the dependence is fully, we depend on our habitat, full stop. No arguing. And what we do in terms of bad stuff will come back. Let's talk about a little bit about the knowledge you brought in and the climate loops. Why did you feel that was so important to go so into details and really, draw out these 5 climate loops that are, as I said, to be reread over and over to just bring home where we are?
Well, actually, it was the knowledge of the climate feedback loops that actually put lack of a better word, a fire under me.
Yeah,
it was like
same
it
here.
was like it was like whoa, and the event that we did with the Dalai Lama and Greta actually was because of films that one of a filmmaker or filmmakers made called Climate Emergency Feedback Loops films. They are available free online, 27 languages, amazing, totally free. And when I learned about that, I was like, oh my God. It was like, I knew that things were serious. As you said, since you were a child, you knew it was serious, but I didn't quite get it. And once it was like, all of a sudden, like I'd hear in the past statistics about, how quickly the earth is warming, but I didn't get it. It was too abstract and too theoretical. And when I learned about them through these films and through talking to scientists in the films, it was like, okay, I get it. And essentially, so I'll pause there.
No, I totally agree that, what you were just saying, the theory, the numbers, the abstractness, but looking into these climate feedback loops, it made it so touchable. You felt it. You could imagine walking over ice and all of a sudden the ice is breaking because everything is disintegrating because it's melting, and you have the microbes waking up and eating whatever is the structure under our eyes. And I'm just thinking, what I can empathize with this. And this is also why this was such a page turner for me, and also a passion turner in your book, that I was aware, but I was in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and it brought home to me that our actions here, whether you're in Europe, United States, Asia, wherever, Africa, South America, we share an atmosphere, and the warming is of the entire atmosphere. And it comes from carbon and fossil fuel, but also from methane, which is released through the ground and the thawing of land that has been frozen for thousands of years, right? And all of a sudden it's melting. And so heating up the atmosphere heats up everywhere. And that's where I think, like the stories about polar bears, for example, and people would say, oh, I feel bad for the polar bears, but it's kind of abstract. We don't think that our actions can impact polar bears, but they do. And what's happening with the polar bears' land impacts us because it changes the weather patterns. So but just to share with the audience here. So essentially, what are climate feedback loops? And climate feedback loops are essentially the warming of the planet is contributing to accelerated and faster warming.
Yeah, exactly. That was, I think, the moment where I thought, oh my God, we cause the planet to cause climate change. So
right. That's very well said. Yeah.
So basically, we are like the first stone of a domino. You have these sort of Legos, I don't know what you call them, these lines, and then we just bump it. And the rest is actually done by nature. So for us to kind of recapture that perpetual positive or positive loop in the sense of negative loop is really difficult. And this is why things are slipping out of our hands, because all of a sudden, Pandora is out of the box. And how do we fetch her?
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So what we have to do as fast as we can is to slow down the feedback loops because they're happening, right? And so what we have to do is to slow them down, eventually halt them, and then the natural cooling feedback loops can be triggered.
So tell us the how then. How can you and I really start slowing it down? And the other, 7.5, almost 8 billion people on the planet. What can we all do in our small with that one objective to slow this down so the feedback loop can actually come back? And we've seen that in the COVID-19 crisis and the lockdown, how quickly nature can spring back without,
Yeah, exactly. I have one question that I'll ask you to see if it would be helpful, because we're talking about feedback loops, but we didn't give an example of one. Would it be helpful to talk about one of them?
Absolutely.
So one of the feedback loops is the forest feedback loop. And I, like you, I'm a tree lover. I really am a tree lover. Like, there's something that connects me very deeply in a heart level to trees. And the forest feedback loop really speaks to me. Forest feedback loops are with hotter temperatures, because we know there's warming, hotter temperatures. The trees in the forests are basically dying. They're decaying, they are burning, and they're getting killed with insects because of the hotter temperatures. So then the trees die. When the trees die, particularly old trees, when they die, old trees that have been around for hundreds, some of them thousands of years, are storing carbon. So trees are like these, it's amazing. They are just pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, just naturally by being trees. They are breathing in our exhale. They're breathing in carbon dioxide. They're releasing oxygen. We co-breathe together. But the trees, through their leaves and their branches, are pulling in carbon dioxide, and they're storing it in the trees. So what happens when the trees die? What happens?
Where they're releasing.
They are releasing all these hundreds and thousands of years of carbon dioxide. There's a rush of carbon dioxide that's released into the atmosphere just because the trees are dying and it's getting hotter. The other thing is that trees are naturally cooling our planet because they're pulling the carbon dioxide down, because of the shade. There's multiple ways through something called transpiration that the trees are cooling the planet. The trees die, then what happens? Then there's less cooling effect. And then both of those mechanisms create it to be hotter and hotter, which means more trees die. So that's an example of a feedback loop, and it's the forest feedback loop. But there's another way that trees are dying. Do you know what that is, Patricia?
Another way that trees are dying. Tell me.
Deforestation.
Of course, yeah, trying to generate farmland. Yeah.
A combination. Farmland or prized furniture or things that we make as a result of the big old trees. The other really important thing, and this is something I learned in a documentary that I watched recently called The Issue with Tissue. Mm-hmm. We, the collective we, as a human on this planet, but we use toilet paper, tissues, some parts of the world, paper towels, and the softer, the better. The more affluent we are, we want these soft tissues on our bodies. And basically those tissues are created through destruction of old growth forests. And so an example is the boreal forest. And we always hear about the Amazon, but the boreal forest in Canada is getting destroyed as a result of wanting to have paper and softer tissues. And then I know in Europe, it's agricultural land, right? And you're looking at mass agriculture, not the small family farms, but the mass agriculture is destroying the forest. So You asked, what can we do? So I'll just say 3 things and then we can unpack it.
Yeah.
First, stop dependence on fossil fuels.
Mhm.
Stop deforestation and regreen the planet.
Yeah. Even though with Regreen the Planet, that was very interesting in your book as well. We say that if you're trying to create carbon sinks, fair enough, but there's nothing better than the old trees, simply because they have so much stored, and the capacity of their mere size to store future CO2 is much bigger. But of course, it's better than nothing. And you have a section where you said, just imagine if every one of us planted 6 trees in their life.
Yeah.
How it would really change. And yes, before we unpack that and stop using fossil fuel, in your book as well, I was flabbergasted, and I kind of thought about it, but didn't, and ignored it in a way, a little bit, like the human feedback you talk about, the delusion. And that is about these pellets that we create, right? And we call them biofuels or alternative fuels. And this is not a biofuel. It is made of what is a carbon sink. It is made of wood, even if it is dead wood, but still. And then it is burned, so releasing even more CO2. And we kind of pass it off as a non-fossil fuel.
Yeah, that was something that when I learned about it, I hadn't thought about it before. But the wood pellets, I know people that use them. I used to use them many years ago.
You're like, oh, I'm green. That's fantastic. I'm doing
exactly.
No.
And it's basically marketed as a biofuel. Yeah. It's not good for the reasons you just said.
No, it's not good. On to your second point. So first of all, thank you. Now, everybody knows more or less what we can do. I can plant trees. I did plant a tree, not only one, but a few. But using fossil fuels is something that is a real investment, needs to be not only thought about, but perhaps also invested in when you have your next generation of heating system at home or anything. Are you going to use solar panels? Are you going to use different biogases or what have you? But what I want to look at is also the second point in your structure, and that is capacities. Okay, the capacity of how we can really confront the humanity crisis when we talk about climate crisis. And you talk about the Earth's capacity and the human capacity. And I would like you to kind of tell us a little bit what you think about when you say Earth's capacity and also the human capacity of what we can do.
Yeah. So Earth's capacity is really simple. Earth is our greatest ally in cooling the planet if we just let her do her thing. So Earth's capacity, so we unpack all the ways that the Earth has this capacity to heal and to cool and to help us through the challenges that we're facing. Human capacity, in essence, is that we have the capacity to change. We have the capacity. It's been, time and time again, it has shown us that we have the capacity as individuals to change and the power of coming together. And that if we can come together, what is possible is really the sky is the limit.
You talk about hope in that section. You talk about compassion. You mentioned also Thupten Jimpa. He is one of your board of directors at Mind and Life. And I saw a really cool podcast together with him where he talked about his book that he wrote around that subject of compassion. And I think he's an amazing individual, also bringing meditation and, how we actually can really feel connected with Earth in order to then care about Earth.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is something that when you talk about climate change or, trying to change it and you watch documentaries even or you watch the news, you go like, And he brings it to you. You were talking earlier on about what motivates me to get involved. And he gets it, or he tries to communicate it from a lot deeper, internal, humanistic approach.
Yeah, I think compassion and love, which is in the title of the book, A Future We Can Love, is absolutely a primary motivator. And compassion means to suffer with. And to suffer with is to suffer with the loss of biodiversity. It's to suffer with people in other parts of the world who are climate refugees. It's to suffer with our children and grandchildren and future generations who are going to be facing hard times. And when we can touch into that compassion, compassion is a primary motivator to action. It's like, if we don't care about something, we're not going to do anything, right? But the moment we can begin to wake up and to realize that we need to do something, it matters who we are, it matters how we care about others, then we're going to be motivated to do something. And we won't be as, I don't think we'll be as afraid.
Yeah, and I love what you just said. If we care about who we are, and Susan, I strongly believe that is really the casus knaxus, because I can be told, please care about something. But ultimately, what motivates all of us is our own innate desire to survive. I mean, we need to go really basic, I think, at this point. Yeah. And what motivates you and me, yes, I'd like to preserve my garden. I like to preserve this and that. But what I like to preserve is, right at the beginning of our conversation, is my family tree, my species as a human. But even though that is already too abstract, so I just think the compassion part, the love part needs to be, hey, if I love myself, if I love my family, I need to look after my habitat. I cannot live like the pigs and go like, oh, whatever. Yeah, but we have to look after what is feeding us, what is giving us the warmth, and because we feel compassionate, not towards the earth or the tree or the banner of it, but to what does that mean to me in my everyday life and survival, good survival going forward, my health, etc. And what can I do? And I think from that really egotistical approach of pure human survival, right, I think one can get to people much better than with, you have to care about Costa Rica's turtles. I mean, it sounds nice, but if I have to do certain things in my day-to-day life, do I say, am I going to take the bus? What is the CO2 footprint here so I can save the turtles in Costa Rica? Do you see what I'm trying to say in terms of the argument, how I would perhaps, if I was a marketeer or somebody that tries to communicate how important it is, I need to make it your thing, your life, your survival, personal, as Susan Bauer-Wu.
That's at the heart of it. That's what's going to motivate us to change. And that's when we talk about capacity and human capacity, it's like we do have the capacity to change, but what motivates people to change? What motivates them to change their behaviors? And it becomes personal. And the moment it becomes personal, then you do something. And then, there's this concept that's discussed in the book called quantum social change. And quantum social change is basically looking at how our values and our mindsets and our day-to-day behaviors impact our initial sphere of influence. So if our sphere of influence is our family, our children, our relatives, our friends, right? And then they actually have their spheres of influence and their community. Eventually, we can all begin to change on much larger global scales. But we'll get paralyzed if we think, oh, we have to change what's happening across the world. No, it's exactly what you said, Patricia. It's our sphere of influence. And I do think that once people are somehow get it, like there's this personal understanding of, yeah, like this is really happening. Like this isn't just, abstract looking at the documentary, but we're noticing that our weather patterns are changing, or we're having forest fires or severe storms that are impacting us. Or if you live near the coast, houses are falling into the ocean that were beautiful oceanfront properties. But once you begin to once you realize it's personal, like actually, this is about me, then you'll do something about it.
I'm so with you there. And thinking about what you were just saying, the weather patterns changing. I mean, it sounds, again, okay, the weather patterns is changing, but if you are literally drowning, you've got floods, like we just had the monsoon in Sri Lanka, where you have the fires everywhere. So last time, if I can share this with you, I was sitting down with my brother, and he was saying, you know what? I think I would like to buy a vineyard, for when he goes into retirement. And I was thinking where to buy it. So we were kind of like, okay, I like that idea. Maybe I'm going to chip in. And then, it sounds lovely for Andaman. And we were seriously going through the globe, including what we may see as weather patterns changing for grapes to grow, for vineyards to grow. And we ended up that the climate will be shifting to some extent, and right or wrong, but in our little layman's minds, we said, okay, I think grapes will die because they will be burned somewhere in California, or somewhere in South Africa, or even around the Mediterranean. And we ended up looking at Ireland, Sweden, Norway, and these kind of regions where potentially the temperature might be right to grow the future grapes, which is sick. Which is the North Stream changing. And also when I think, okay, where am I going to buy my next property? Is it going to be a houseboat? Because, the sea levels are gobbling up our tectonic plates. Or is it going to be on the top of the hill? Because if the water level is rising, then, my beach house is not going to be there for very much longer. And I cannot, have my daughter inherit it eventually. I mean, this is the kind of layman thinking that me and my brother started to discuss, thinking about our future investments. Considering already climate change continuing the way it is, COP21 or not.
That's a very, very powerful example, and I think that, but that's when you are more awake and you're thinking about this. I think that there's a lot of people that look at short term, in the short term, and don't quite see as far in the future as you're envisioning, but you're absolutely right in how you're thinking about it.
What also touched me about your book was, apart from the statistics I mentioned earlier on, is you talk about the dawn of the age of enough. I like that. Let's talk about the age of enough. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, we have been thinking that more is better. And whether it's more stuff or more profit, striving to reach the next goal, it's just like we are endlessly dissatisfied with who we are, what we have. And so the age of enough and the dawning of the age of enough, I think, is absolutely essential for the human species. And again, we're mostly, just to be really frank here, remember that we are mostly talking about the people that have more than their fair share. Okay.
Industrialized countries,
and the people who are the middle class and above in those countries. So just to for us to keep ourselves real with that. But basically that's a lot of people, and those people are the ones that are doing the damage on the planet, not the people that have less. And so, we're like, when I was thinking about this when I was writing the book, and thinking about, again, my grandchildren that are only 1 and 4. And if there's one thing that I would want them to be, is for them to realize that love is enough, that, connecting with nature is enough, having relationships that matter, doing meaningful work, trying to make a positive difference to your family, your friends, your neighbors, your community, or even larger. And so how can we begin to realize that we don't have to strive, we don't have to keep grasping and attaching to more and more and more? And even as it relates to investments and profits, when can we begin to shift that paradigm from it just being about the bottom line, money profit, financial profit, but actually look at the profit of the planet and people's well-being, and looking at more of the common good?
What you're hinting at there is so fundamental, and it was already a little bit covered by that snippet we saw about the documentary. But I think industry generally has come a long way, even though there is still a lot of greenwashing, what we call when we talk about ESG. But I see it, being in my prime job, an investor in companies and in the finance business, investment business in general, and have been for the last 30 years. I do see a shift. I do see that now ESG behavior, that you look at all of the parties you do impact, hopefully in a mutually beneficial way, is bottom line business. It is not even oh my God, that's a USP. That is really making you special. No, you don't have ESG. You don't have that mindset that sustainability is part of your business's growth in our capitalistic society. You will not even be considered. And we have huge private equity funds also saying our funds, we are weeding them through. We're throwing out companies that do not adhere to certain ESG standards. And I think their governance is really integrating that more and more. And so I think, hallelujah, this is really good. So somehow, we do even have this private-public partnership, be it on a city level, be it on an investment level, be it, these kind of common efforts are there that almost the grassroots, the Joe Bloggs, feels less empowered. But it seems that the big guys are almost 100% aware if they can afford to focus on it, because they need to feed 1.3 billion people, India, or China, how much they can be ESG compliant simply because they need to feed their people, whatever the consequences. But right now is more important than demain, tomorrow, is on another level. But I think what you were saying about having enough, not striving, yes, I agree. And I think that their consciousness and awareness really needs to come into the equation, because us as human beings, all we want to do is, of course, have that evolution, always wanting more, always wanting to discover. On one hand, we are totally slothy and lazy, and as wonderful as we are, we don't want to do anything unless we have to. But there's always this competition just to make sure that I'm stronger than you, because then my race or my family survives. So this push for more, I think, is something that is deep down in our human DNA, right, in our brain. And there to find the equilibrium and to grow in a capitalist society, integrating the planet, not having that one-way street of extraction, but value creation together, the human with the earth and earth with the human. I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to.
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. Yeah. But I'm so fascinated about your perspective from working, being an investor for corporations, and curious about the industrial growth society and the extractive mentality, because we as a species do have this extractive mentality where we think our natural resources are going to last forever. And so we just keep going, full on extracting as if we can.
As if we had 5 planets. Somebody, I don't know who it was.
Yeah.
I love that. People don't realize we don't have 5 planets we can live on. This is the one.
This is our only home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our only home. And what I also thought was interesting was where, talking about industrialized societies, that technology got us into this. Technology will get us out of this. I'm not so sure this is the answer, because everything that you just said, also with the dawn of the ages of enoughness, is pointing to me, we actually have the structure, the technology structure. I'm not saying stop developing. I'm not stop growing, but I just think what we have right now, we have to maybe engage in a different how and make it work so that we actually do plant trees rather than have a CO2 certificate trading, which I think is also a little bit of a gray zone. People discuss it, some love it, some hate it, that we need to just downsize. But downsizing for the majority of people that are still living in developing countries and dawning countries is not what they want to hear, Susan. So how can we get those governments on the side of maybe more enlightened companies, countries that are seeing the impact of the climate change?
So the question is about the governments, or
everybody that doesn't want to downsize because they don't have anything. They need to upsize to downsize. And how can we make them upsize in a smarter way than we did and not make the same mistakes?
Yeah, I don't think we should be pointing the finger at these less developed societies and countries. I don't think they're not the problem. The problem really is actually boils down to the United States and Europe. Europe, I believe, is better than the United States, but we can look at maybe how China, for example, is growing very fast and developing very fast, and they may be having new technologies, but I think I don't want to point it to them, but we cannot just assume that we have to that we do have to downsize. I don't know if it's downsize is the right word, but again, it's first, let's begin with just being satisfied with who we are, where we are, what we have. And then the moment we begin to do that, we can be a little bit more mindful. We can then begin to take actions. And the third part of the book is about will, and will is really these two different components. One is about recognizing heartbreak, and again, this is something that I think can shut down some people. But the more that I actually have been honest with myself about the sadness of the state that we're in, and about species being lost and trees dying, etc., is that we need to be honest and allow ourselves to feel some sadness, uncertainty about the future of our children and our grandchildren and future generations. But with uncertainty, that's a place of possibility, because it's not certain. We don't know. And so to me, that's also a space of hope. Uncertainty can be a space of hope.
Yeah, and that resonated so much with me, because you're talking about pessimism, and the Dalai Lama said there's no space for pessimism, okay? It's like basically saying everything is a disaster, and that keeps you from the motivation to do something about it. So basically you lost hope. Other people you quoted saying, well, optimism is the same thing, just on the other side. Yeah, okay, fine, fate will sort it out. No, I think optimism is a tool to confront something. It gives you the zest to actually do something. But uncertainty, I love uncertainty, because again, in my line of business, especially right now, with wars going on, with tension, with debt ceilings, I mean, everything is at the moment in a perfect storm, not only in terms of nature, but also the financial market. Uncertainty is always where people go like, okay, we kind of have possibilities. We can go left, right. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? But
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And the doing is never in question. We are uncertain. We need to make sure. So it drives you the motivation to be proactive about something you're uncertain about. So I make certain that X, Y, Z. I might be wrong, but at least you do something and you can still pivot. So uncertainty, you say, is something that is a driver. But believing the science, Susan, we can be certain that we on a really bad path right now. So how do we consolidate the really negative data with people just going, it's too late anyway, I may as well just, live?
Yeah. Well, my understanding from the scientists that I've spoken to is that we have not crossed the tipping point. We are close. The next decade is really, really critical. The next year is important, but I mean, it's right now. The time is now to really wake up and to take this seriously. So, and to have a long-term vision instead of our immediate comforts right here, we have to be able to have a vision for the future. And that's where actually the second part of the will section is about wonder. And with wonder, there's two parts of wonder when I think about wonder. One is like waking up to the beauty of what's right here, what is before us, to look at the clouds, to look at the flower, look inside a flower, look at into the eyes of another person. And that was something, early on in my career, my first job, I was actually a cancer nurse and a hospice nurse, and worked with people at the end of their lives. And one thing we would see time and time again, and we know it from our loved ones who have moved on, is that we begin to recognize that the moment we recognize that our lives really are precious, are fragile and precious, we don't take things for granted. And we begin our priorities shift. We find meaning in our lives. And to me, the times that we are in as it relates to the climate crisis is that humanity can realize this world, this place, this time in our lives is precious. And I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to make meaning and make the most of it right here, right now.
Yeah. And I think the definition of enjoyment is not in the sense of extraction, but awareness and being part and kind of linked to whatever surrounds us, as you were saying, the clouds, the sky, the flowers. And what I thought was really what struck a chord with me is to just think that I am part of this. I am nature, not human. I am nature, I am natural, and I am finite. And the sense of finite maybe just strikes you when you are in your 50s, you've gone through menopause or whatever, and you go like, oh my God. And just to see that feedback is so important. So I wonder, when people feel, okay, I want to do action, but I don't want to be pigeonholed, I'm going to do my little things, and I want to really have the feeling that I'm doing something, I'm good on the path I'm going and I'm helping. What I thought was interesting in your book, when you just said the basic knowledge of how I'm doing, the feedback of how I'm doing on a day-to-day level changes my behavior. And there's the example of the electricity meter being in the middle of the kitchen or the family room, telling you how much electricity you're using, or being somewhere in the cellar. Do you want to give that example? Because that also struck a big chord with me.
Yeah, that was really enlightening to see that study that was done, where basically exactly what you said. There was electricity meter that was right in the center of the house, so they could see it every time they walked by, and then there was another group of homes where it was in the basement, and essentially just having that awareness on a day-to-day impacted how much electricity they used.
Yeah, and you can make
Yeah.
it a real sport. You can make it a real sport. And the other example and study I thought was also very interesting is the naming and shaming. Oh my God, of companies. So I don't know which government it was, but they kind of released the carbon CO2 footprint or the biggest polluters in the country for that year. And the top company that was like on that list said, oh my God, that is really bad PR. Apart from bad from for the planet, is bad for business because green is green, like Jeff Immelt, the ex-CEO of GE also said. And you know, just this transparency hits it home. And this is what I meant earlier on, Sue, is what I said, make it personal. Name the company, show the meter, show what it means to my pockets if I use more hot water or less hot water. And then all of a sudden I'm like, boop, perking up and thinking, hey, you know, if I change my behavior because I have that knowledge, I can actually change the entire picture and context.
That's exactly right. Once we can begin to realize that we can make a difference, the blaming and shaming of the companies is such a great example and then they're going to change. They're going to change. I mean,
it shows that you can. It's not a question that you can't. It's a question of you can, and yeah, maybe a little bit of short-term investment, but long-term, hey, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when we think about what can we do, again, I'd like to go back and try to make it a little bit more tangible. So you're touching upon it, which is fantastic, but let's go a little bit, a little bit deeper here. So I said there were three things. We cut down on fossil fuels, right? Our dependence on it. We cut down on deforestation and we regreen the planet. Okay. And that sounds a bit abstract, but I think if we think about what is it very specifically, think about climate, think about those things when you travel, when you purchase something, when you vote, what you eat, all those, like these are things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And if we just stopped and thought about it and made decisions that were more congruent, then we can all we're all part of this web. This one web, we are all part of a web on this planet. And the Buddhists call this something called Indra's net. I don't know if you remember reading that, but Indra's net means that basically each one of us reflects, we are all part of this interconnected web. And if you imagine that we are a gem and we're all kind of connected, and each gem is reflecting the other, and we all go around the planet. So, the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink isn't separate from who we are. We are that. That's external, but it is who we are.
And multiply that by 8 to 9 billion people. And this is where I really get goosebumps, but in the negative way. If I think about my daily routine, my cosmetics, my shampoos, my going to the toilet, my, boiling the water, my food waste, even though that is like a pet peeve of mine. When Victoria was little, she didn't eat her dinner. She had it for breakfast. There was no food waste in my household. The poor kid. My husband thought I was terribly abusive to my child. And yes, I was. Maybe that is called abuse, that I was abusive. But yes, and if I multiply that with just the capacity, and let me now ask you a very controversial question. Let me ask you about what is the maximum breaking point. You were talking about the tipping point, and we are not there yet. Great. That's good news. But what I see is that we do have an expansion of human beings on that one planet, that is one planet with less and less and less resources. Where does this equation end? Where's the tipping point, if at all? What have you heard? What do you think personally?
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, and I think that the scientists are not totally in agreement about the exact tipping point. So I really don't feel qualified to answer that. But I don't think I think I touched upon in the last chapter of the book. It's not really the number of people, but it's our consumption that matters. And it's really the most affluent countries, the most affluent individuals in the most affluent countries that have the greatest impact.
Yes, absolutely. And it is possible because there are still indigenous tribes, be it in Africa, be it in South America and other parts of this world that have, an ecosystem, and they really use nature, live with nature, and see themselves very differently as part of nature, very differently to us, where we think we can dominate nature and just get what we want. Susan, we're coming to the conclusion that I could chat for hours with you, continuing every little path, because you've structured the book so well, and there's so many different aspects, be it from a scientific point of view, be it from a human and also spiritual point of view. I mean, it goes really in that way, and it is a system in both. It is a very holistic approach, which I love. What would you say if you could give one message to the generation, to your grandchildren? Let's make it personal, as we discussed. What is the main message that you would say? Listen, if you have this kind of information, if whatever, what do you say to them? How they should see themselves, identify themselves as human beings to make sure that this planet survives?
You are enough. You have enough. Because I want to say about the you are enough is that I think that so many people are anxious and depressed, and they feel really inadequate. And so they're looking for external validation because they don't feel like they're enough. And so that's when I say you are enough. That's what I mean by that. So you are enough. You have enough, which includes relationships with one another, relationships with the natural world, and that you are part of both the problem and the solutions. You are part of the solutions. Part of wonder is wondering and imagining how the world could look in a different way that actually might be way better and more satisfying than it is right now. And then the final thing is that you're not alone, that there are billions of brilliant, beautiful people who care all over the planet, all over your community, and you're not alone. And by realizing that you're not alone, it actually buoys you and it helps you carry you forward so you too can make a difference.
I think this resonates superbly. And I wonder, I don't have grandchildren yet, but I wonder to what extent you would say, your hero in this context should be Greta Thunberg and what she, as a 15-year-old unleashed with Fridays for Future. What do you make of her? And what do you make of her path? And how far do you think she will go in this conversation?
Yeah, well, I think, one thing I learned from Greta is that she's actually really humble, and she does not see herself as a hero and see herself as alone doing anything. She sees that she stands on the shoulders of giants, and she's part of an amazing community of young people. Like, there are amazing, amazing young people all over the world that are and doing different things. Some of them are engineers. Some of them are, starting, businesses. Some of them are activists. Some of them are spiritual teachers, psychologists, helping people cope. It's like this amazing, amazing. It's so inspiring to look at the web of younger generations. And that gives me hope, actually, to be really honest with you. And so, with Greta, what I have found that I think not only me, but I think many of us have found so powerful with her is that she's real. She's real. Like, she's down to earth. She calls things the way they are. She's not afraid. She has courage. Yet she's very humble, very respectful, and clear, and I don't know what her future path will be, but I know that she'll probably do everything she can to try to make a difference. That she'll do that like every waking day of her life.
Yeah, she definitely found her mission and her path. And you were just talking about courage. You talk about this also in your book, sattva, and in Sanskrit, right? That part of is used.
The bodhisattva.
Yes, the bodhisattva,
Yeah,
exactly. Great.
Yeah.
I mean, with humble, when she held her speech in front of the UN and she stood there and said, "How dare you? How dare you?" I think the world community watching this, including me, I was like, whoa, this goes beyond courage. That goes, being perhaps a bit disrespectful, but perhaps is what it needs. I don't know, because, words you say you can't take back. One of those things, like time, you can't take them back. And I just thought at that moment, Greta, that wasn't needed. I think you're super in communicating, but this is my private feeling. It really is just my gut saying, how dare you is offensive. It was to me. And I know exactly where she's coming from, and how dare we to just extract and not care about the future generations. I get her. It was very naked out there, I felt.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one sentence has been repeated probably millions of times since she's done it, right? But you know what? Because it's being repeated, people, I think it was like a wake-up call for a lot of people. And all the other sugarcoating, being careful that you're going to hurt people's feelings hasn't broken through. So I think it was really pointed. I think Greta will say maybe she didn't have to be so dramatic about it. Again, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but it was pretty dramatic. But I feel like hearing those words in such a firm way from a young person it positively impacted me. Actually.
Yeah. No, what I thought was at some point I heard her say, I don't care if people like me or not. And, if you're on a mission like that, you cannot think about what do people think about me. You just have to think about the mission. And maybe that is then also justifying it. One last question before I get to my end quote. How do you actually, as a mother or grandmother, teach your children? Because it all comes, the mindset we're talking about as well, it all comes from education. And the education does start with the parents. It doesn't start with the kindergarten, but it starts with what the child observes and absorbs how the family is acting. What are the three things you would teach a child as soon as to always integrate that they are, with a certain action, with a certain purchase, are doing something for or against the future habitat?
Well, I do think that maintaining curiosity is fundamental, having a spirit of curiosity. And children have that, right? Children have this sense of curiosity that, again, after the ages of 6, 7, 8, we start to lose it because it's kind of drilled out of us. And so what I would hope and what I am going to try to instill in my grandchildren is a spirit of curiosity. And that's fundamental, because once you have a spirit of curiosity, you can see beauty in the world. You can begin to come up with creative solutions. And you also begin to recognize and to see the interconnectedness of everything they purchase. It's not about one particular purchase. But if you're curious about it, where did this come from? And if you're curious, then when they begin to read, they could see, this came from all the way on the other side of the world. And then they could learn more as they get older. What kind of company was that? What kind of, employment practices? Is this coming from natural resources, or is it man-made? The idea of plastics. So that's something I kind of go on a riff about in the book, about single-use plastics. It is something like, even just ask yourself, where did this come from and where's this going to go? It takes more than 1,000 years for plastic to decay if we don't burn it or we drop it in the bottom of the ocean. So for our children, our grandchildren, curiosity will come up with solutions. Curiosity will drive your behaviors, and it will nourish you because you're finding the beauty in the world around you.
Yeah. Shoshin, it's like the beginner's mind.
Yes.
That is so important. And the tagline of Mentory TV is "Stay curious." I see myself as a terribly infantile, because I always walk around the world and I'm so curious about a lot of things. But you see, talking about technology, and I just interject there, their technology helps us, because what you're talking about is stay curious, read the labels, let's say, about the purchase, and here blockchain technology and the supply chain, that you can really trace where your product you're finding in retail comes from, and who's been handling it, and where and how, and the quality, and as you were saying, also the employment situation, sweatshop or not, organic or not. This is where technology can help us a lot. So that is a very good application, for example, for blockchain, which helps your grandkids to really trace whatever we put in our mouth, whether it is congruent with our habitat or whether it is destroying it.
Very well said. Yeah.
No. Well, Susan, I'm going to, read out a couple of quotes before we end this fantastic conversation. And this, as I say, we could go on for hours, and we have already gone on for quite some time. The first quote is on page 107. Edward Maybach, the director of the Center for Climate Change Communication at George Mason University. He says, "I've come to see climate change as the greatest public health threat that we face. But I've also come to see climate change as potentially the greatest public health opportunity that we face." That's the first quote. The second one is by one of your colleagues, Mathieu Ricard. I think he's a Frenchman. And he says, "This is a crisis of the superfluous," talking about enoughness, "and also of the disparities, the inequalities that have been increasing in the last 30 years in all the developed countries. The climate crisis really boils down to altruism versus selfishness. We don't have 3 or 5 planets. We just have one. So we must do better with less."
That sums it up.
That sums it up.
Yeah.
That sums it up. This magnificent book, my dear Mentory TV community, everybody that's already part of the community are going to join us, coming out on the 13th of June. A Future We Can Love, inspired by the conversation between His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and Greta Thunberg, written by Dr. Susan Bauer-Wu, the president of Mind and Life Institute. Thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your book, and awareness, our awareness, making it personal will open up the awareness in the system. I think we are moving.
Thank you so much, Patricia. This has been pure delight, and thank you for your curiosity. You are a role model for all of us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is great. Thank you. I really take this to heart. And thank you, my dear Mentory TV community, for having joined us yet again for an awesome conversation, this time with Dr. Susan Bauer-Wu. Stay curious, and I hope to see you on our next show. Bye.
Together, we go out there. Together, we begin to share. Together, we find our way. Together.